In the middle of a vast, empty field on a distant planet, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the dry land. The wind blew softly, carrying dust and the scent of the earth. The land was quiet, almost peaceful, except for one figure, walking slowly across it. She was a woman, but not like any human the landowner had ever seen. Her skin was a strange shade of green, and her eyes glowed a soft, otherworldly blue. Her clothes were tattered, and her face was marked with exhaustion. She carried nothing but a small bag slung over her shoulder, yet her presence seemed to carry the weight of a world. The man who owned the land, a tall, broad-shouldered human named Robert, stood at the edge of his property, staring at the figure. He had seen many strange things in his life as a landowner, but this was different. An alien, he thought, shaking his head in disbelief. He had heard rumors of creatures from other planets, but he had never actually seen one in person. Robert watched as the alien woman stumbled and almost fell to her knees, clearly struggling to stay on her feet. Her movements were slow, and she seemed to be in pain. She paused for a moment, resting, then lifted her head and scanned the horizon. Robert's heart skipped a beat when their eyes met. There was something in her gaze, something deep and full of desperation. She started walking again, and Robert took a step forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. He knew he should keep his distance, but something about her made him want to know more. "Hey!" Robert shouted, his voice carrying across the wind. The alien woman stopped and looked toward him, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make out the source of the sound. She took a cautious step forward, but said nothing. Robert's instincts kicked in. He knew how dangerous it could be to deal with aliens, especially when they were alone and desperate. Still, he felt an odd pull to help her. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice softening a little. The woman paused, her expression unreadable. She took a few more steps toward him, then spoke in a language Robert didn't understand. Her voice was melodic, almost like a song, but the words were foreign. Robert couldn't understand her words, but he noticed how tired and hungry she looked. Her body seemed frail, like she had been traveling for days without rest. She took another step forward, and Robert took one back, unsure of what to do. He had heard stories of alien creatures that had come to Earth, but they were usually violent or unpredictable. This one, though, didn't seem dangerous. She looked more like a traveler who had gotten lost in an unfamiliar world. Finally, the woman stopped in front of him, her eyes meeting his once again. She took a deep breath and spoke in broken English, the words coming out slowly but with a sense of purpose. "I'll work your fields. Human, just feed my hungry children," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Robert's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Work your fields. Feed her children. What was she talking about? He stared at her, his mind racing with questions. This woman, this alien, was offering to work for him. And what about her children? What kind of children did she have? He glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see a group of alien creatures lurking in the distance. But there was no one else, just the woman. He took a moment to process her request. It didn't make any sense. Why would she offer herself as labor? And why would she want food so badly that she would make such a strange offer? He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "You're asking for food?" he asked cautiously. "You want to work here in exchange for food?" Woman nodded, her eyes pleading. She was desperate, he could tell. "I have no place to go," she continued softly. "My children, they're starving." Robert felt a strange pang in his chest. He had heard of alien species being exploited before, but this was different. This woman was offering herself, willing to work for food. There was something about her that made Robert pause. She wasn't like the stories he had heard. As he looked at her, standing there in front of him, her body weak and her face drawn with exhaustion, he felt a sense of unease, mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite name. Suspicion and curiosity filled his mind. Who was she? What was she really after? And why would she trust a human, someone she didn't even know? Before he could ask her more questions, she spoke again, her voice filled with a quiet desperation. "Please, feed my children." Robert stared at her for a long moment, the wind picking up again, carrying the weight of her words. He didn't know why, but something told him this was only the beginning of something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. The sun had set, and the once golden fields were now bathed in the soft light of the moon. Robert stood at the edge of the vast land, his arms crossed as he watched the alien woman, who was now bending down, pulling up weeds from the soil. Her movements were slow but deliberate, and every now and then she paused, wiping the sweat from her brow. She had insisted that she could work despite the exhaustion in her eyes, and now, after just an hour of work, Robert was beginning to wonder whether there was more to her than met the eye. He had allowed her to stay for the night, giving her a small area to sleep near the fields, but he had made no promises. In his mind, he still couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too strange. It's a mysterious alien woman offering to work for food. It didn't make sense. Despite his doubts, Robert watched her work. She didn't ask for tools or special treatment. She simply got to work, her hands skillfully pulling up the weeds from the rich, dry earth. It was clear to him that she was used to hard labor, but what struck him the most was her speed and precision. Every movement seemed calculated, every pull of the weeds more efficient than the last. There was a calm determination in her, as if she had been working fields like this for years. Robert's curiosity was piqued. The more he watched her, the more he couldn't help but notice the strange energy about her. She didn't move like a normal worker. She seemed different. Her strength was unlike anything he'd seen before. She wasn't just pulling weeds, she was almost commanding the soil. It was as though the ground itself responded to her touch, the plants and roots loosening with ease, the soil turning without resistance. He had been observing her for over an hour now, unsure of what to make of the situation. What if she was just a skilled laborer? Or maybe this was some sort of teston, alien trick. Was she trying to prove herself to him? Was she setting the stage for something bigger? "Hey," Robert called, his voice cutting through the still night air. The woman stopped and looked up at him, her glowing blue eyes piercing through the dim light. She was breathing heavily, but she didn't seem tired, just focused. She wiped her brow again, the faintest sign of weariness showing on her face. "What is it, human?" she asked, her voice calm but slightly strained. "You've been working for a while now," Robert said, walking closer to her. "How long has it been since you've had real food?" Her gaze didn't leave him as she slowly stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands. "I haven't eaten in days," she replied simply, "but I'm not here for myself. I only need enough to feed my children. I'll work until you're satisfied." Her words struck Robert deeply. He could tell she wasn't lying. There was no deception in her voice, no ulterior motive, just a simple, raw truth. But still, his mind raced. Why would an alien woman offer herself up for labor so easily? And why had she chosen his fields? A part of him wanted to ask her more questions. The curiosity gnawed at him, but another part told him to remain cautious. "I need to know more," he muttered, almost to himself. The woman looked at him, her expression unreadable. But there was a flicker of something, a warning, perhaps hidden in her gaze. "I'm not a threat to you," she said softly, as though sensing his inner turmoil. "I'm just a mother trying to save her children. You can trust me." Robert swallowed, uncertain of how to respond. Trust wasn't something he offered easily. But what choice did he have? She had already started working for him, and if what she said was true, her children were starving. The logic of the situation made no sense. Yet the urgency in her voice left him with little choice. "Well, if you're going to work here, you'll need more than just these bare hands," Robert said, breaking the silence. He took a step forward, his eyes scanning the tools nearby. "I can get you some proper equipment, but you'll need to prove you can handle it." The woman's eyes softened. "I don't need tools. I just need food for my children. Please, don't waste time." Her plea hit Robert hard. There was something about the way she said, "Don't waste time," that sent a chill through him. Was she just asking for food because she was desperate? Or did she already know something he didn't? Robert hesitated for a moment, still unsure. But then something inside him pushed him forward. There was something about this woman, something that called out to him. He didn't know if it was her eyes, the way she worked, or the quiet strength she exuded. But he couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than just an alien traveler. She was something ... different. "All right," he said slowly, stepping back. "I'll bring you food, but I'll also test you. I need to know you're capable of working here." The woman nodded without hesitation. "I understand." As Robert turned to leave, a strange feeling washed over him. The wind rustled the crops, and for the first time, the field felt alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. Something was stirring, something beyond the simple exchange of labor for food. He just didn't know yet what it was. The following morning, Robert woke early, the weight of the alien woman's request still lingering in his thoughts. As he stepped outside to the fields, he could see her working in the distance, her figure moving with a quiet determination. The sun had only begun to rise, and the sky was painted with hues of orange and purple, a calm contrast to the storm of questions brewing in his mind. She had worked tirelessly the day before, pulling weeds from the fields with an ease that seemed almost unnatural. Robert had brought her food and offered the necessary tools, but she had refused them all, saying that she only needed a small amount of sustenance for herself. The rest, she said, was for her children. Her children. That was the one thing Robert couldn't stop thinking about. She hadn't mentioned them much, only saying that they were hungry. But something in the way she spoke of them, something in the sadness that clouded her eyes whenever she mentioned them, made Robert uneasy. If she was so powerful, why were her children so desperate? Why did she need food so urgently? As Robert approached, the woman looked up from the fields and gave him a faint, tired smile. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Morning, Robert," replied, his voice still carrying that edge of uncertainty. "How's the work going?" She nodded, her gaze returning to the rows of crops. "It's going well," she said, though Robert could tell by the way her shoulders sagged slightly that she was far from rested. "Your land is fertile. It's been many years since I've worked on such good soil." Robert wasn't sure if she was complimenting him or simply stating the truth, but he decided to let it pass. He walked up beside her, his eyes scanning the fields. The crops looked healthier already, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as he watched her work. Something about her felt different. There was a quiet power to her, something beyond the simple labor she was doing. "You've been working hard," Robert said, his voice softening, "but I still don't understand. You say you have children, but where are they? Why don't they help you?" The woman's movements faltered for a moment, and Robert saw her hands tremble slightly before she steadied herself. For the first time, he saw something other than determination in her eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual calm demeanor. "They are hiding," she said, her voice quiet, barely above a whisper. "I don't want them to be seen by anyone. Not yet." "Why?" Robert asked, his curiosity piqued. Despite his better judgment, why hide them? The woman paused, her gaze lowering to the ground. Her fingers tightened around the crops she was pulling, almost as if she were holding herself together. "Because they are not like other children," she said slowly. "They are different. They have abilities that others will fear. They are not ready to be seen by the world. Robert's brow furrowed. Abilities. What do you mean by that? The woman hesitated, and for a moment, Robert thought she might refuse to answer. But then she spoke, her voice tinged with a quiet sadness. My children were born with powers that no one else possesses. They are a part of an ancient race beings that were once rulers of the stars. But their world was destroyed, and now they are the last of their kind. Her words hung heavy in the air. Robert's mind struggled to comprehend what she was saying. He had heard stories of powerful creatures and alien species, but this was something entirely different. An ancient race, rulers of the stars. It was hard to imagine. Yet the way she spoke, the way her eyes darkened as she mentioned her children's powers, made him believe her. You're telling me, Robert said, his voice tinged with disbelief, that your children, they're like you. They have powers. The woman nodded slowly. Yes and no. Their powers are stronger than mine. They are still growing, and I fear what will happen when they realize what they are capable of. I've hidden them for as long as I can, but I can't keep them hidden forever. Robert was silent, his mind racing. Powers beyond anything he could imagine. It was hard to accept, but the way she spoke was clear she wasn't lying. Why? Come to me? Robert asked, still not fully understanding. Why offer to work for me? What do you want? The woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet desperation. I need your help. My children are growing stronger every day, and soon they will need food. I don't have the resources to feed them, and I don't trust others to do so. I need a safe place for them, a place where they can grow without fear. Her words hit Robert hard. There was no hiding the emotion in her voice, no mask to hide the truth. She was not asking for help for herself, she was asking for her children. Robert's mind swirled with a mix of confusion and sympathy. He had a choice to make. This wasn't just about alien labor for food anymore. This was about a woman with a dark past and children who might one day change everything. But what could he do? He wasn't a hero, just a landowner. He wasn't prepared for anything like this. The woman stood up, brushing the dirt off her hands. I know it is too much to ask, she said softly, her voice barely audible. But please, you must understand. They need me, and I need you. Robert looked at her, his heart torn. He had already made one choice by letting her stay, by giving her a chance to work. But this was something bigger, something that could change everything. As he stared at the woman standing before him, he realized that his world was about to shift in ways he could never have predicted. The days blurred together as Robert continued to watch the alien woman, whom he now knew as Ilara, work in the fields. Each day, she labored tirelessly, pulling weeds, planting seeds, and tending to the crops with a quiet precision that astounded him. Yet, despite her strength and skill, there was something about her that unsettled him. It wasn't just her alien appearance or the mysterious powers she had hinted at. It was the way she seemed to command the land itself, as though the soil responded to her touch. The plants bending and growing with unnatural speed. It was on the fourth day that Robert first saw a sign of the power Ilara had alluded to. He had been working on the far side of the land, checking on the irrigation system, when he heard a strange hum from across the field. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder, more intense, like the low vibration of an unseen force. Curious, Robert set down his tools and walked toward the source of the sound. As he neared the rows of crops where Ilara was working, he saw her standing still, her hands extended in front of her, palms open toward the earth. The air around her seemed to shimmer with energy, and the ground beneath her feet rippled as though it was alive. The plants in front of her appeared to be growing faster, the leaves unfurling before his eyes. as if they were being coaxed into life by some unseen power. Robert's heart raced as he watched. He had seen many things in his life machines, technology, and the marvels of human progress, but this was beyond anything he had ever known. Ilara wasn't just tending to the crops. She was manipulating them. It was as if she was bending nature to her will. He watched in awe as the plants grew taller, their roots twisting and expanding beneath the surface, weaving together like strands of living fabric. The hum grew louder, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from within the earth itself. The energy around Ilara intensified, and Robert could feel the ground tremble beneath his feet. "Ilara," he called, his voice rising in alarm. "What's happening? What are you doing?" Ilara didn't respond immediately. She kept her hands extended, her eyes closed in concentration. It was only when the plants around her had grown to an almost unnatural height that she lowered her arms and opened her eyes. The hum gradually faded, and the land fell silent once more. "I've been telling you," Lyra said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I told you my children are not the only ones with power. I can do things like this, too." Robert stood frozen, his mouth dry as he processed what he had just witnessed. This is what you meant. Your powers." Ilara nodded, but her expression was somber, almost regretful. "Yes, my powers are not just for survival. They are a gift, but also a burden. I can do many things that would frighten most. I have the ability to heal, to manipulate the elements, and even to influence the growth of plants and the earth itself." Her words hung heavy in the air, and Robert struggled to grasp the full extent of what she was saying. She wasn't just a laborer, some poor alien seeking refuge. She was powerful far beyond what he could ever have imagined. And yet, she was here, working his fields, asking for food. She had come to him with a humble request. But what if there was more to her story than she had let on? "But why?" Robert asked, his voice thick with confusion. "Why do you need help? Ty, why come to me for food and shelter? You have all this power, and yet you say you need to hide your children." "Really going on, Ilara?" Ilara lowered her head, her eyes filled with sadness. "Because power like mine is not something the world can understand, Robert. And power like my children's, it is dangerous. People will want to use it. People will fear it. My people were once great rulers, but we were hunted down, forced into hiding. My children, they are the last of us. And I will protect them with everything I have." Robert felt a shiver run down his spine as he listened to her words. This wasn't just a woman in need of help. This was a being whose very existence had been shaped by fear and survival. And now she was hiding in plain sight, working his fields, hoping that no one would notice the truth of who and what she really was. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about her children being hungry. This was about an ancient race, a forgotten history, and powers that could change everything. Ilara wasn't just asking for food. She was asking for safety. She was hiding, not just from the world, but from the dangers of being too powerful in a world that didn't understand. "Ilara," Robert said, his voice soft but steady. "I don't know what to do with this. You're asking me to hide you, to protect you, and your children." She nodded, her gaze distant as if she were already thinking of the dangers they faced. "Yes, you don't have to understand everything. Robert, you just need to understand this. My children need a safe place to grow, and I need someone to help me protect them." Robert looked at her, her face drawn with the weight of her words, and suddenly the land he had worked so hard to cultivate didn't feel like just a piece of property anymore. It felt like a battleground, a place where ancient powers and dangerous secrets could either thrive or be destroyed. As he stared at Ilara, he realized that he had a choice to make. He could turn her away, walk away from this strange, unexpected encounter, and return to the simple life he had known. Or he could stand beside her, protect her, and become a part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of unspoken decisions. And in that silence, Robert knew that his life would never be the same again. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields as Robert worked on repairs near the edge of his land. Despite the promise of a quiet life, things had become increasingly complicated since Ilara's arrival. His mind was constantly occupied with thoughts of her and the growing tension surrounding her presence. The alien woman, with her otherworldly powers and cryptic words, had already begun to change everything he knew. It had been a few days since Ilara had revealed the true nature of her abilities, and every day he watched her, he saw more signs of her strength. She was no longer just a laborer. She was something else entirely, someone who, with a simple gesture, could make crops grow faster. The earth bend to her will. But with that power came something darker, something Robert hadn't yet fully grasped. As Ilara continued to work tirelessly in the fields, Robert found himself worrying more and more about her children. She hadn't spoken of them since that first night. And Robert couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their story than she had shared. Why? Were they so powerful? Why were they hiding? One evening, as Robert was preparing for bed, he heard footsteps outside his window. He stood up, cautiously approaching the door. It was late, far later than when Ilara usually finished her work. He had heard nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the crops for hours. But now there was movement. When he opened the door, he saw her standing there in the dim light, looking out toward the horizon. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with worry. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Is everything all right?" Robert asked, his voice low. Up late, Ilara didn't turn to face him immediately. Instead, she stared out into the distance, her posture rigid as if something was pulling at her, urging her to look out at the world beyond the safety of the land she had found. "My children. They're hungry again," she said quietly. "But it's not just hunger. They're growing, their powers. They're stronger every day." Robert took a step forward, his concern deepening. "Ilara, I don't understand. What do you mean? What's happening to them?" She finally turned to face him, her eyes dark with worry. "The more they grow, the more their abilities increase, but they don't have control. They can't. They don't understand what they are, and I'm afraid. They could hurt someone, or worse, they could attract attention from people who want to use them." Robert's heart sank. He had feared that this was more than just a mother trying to protect her children. This was something far more dangerous than he had imagined. The powers Ilara had hinted at, the powers that were slowly growing in her children, were not just a curiosity, they were a threat. "I'll help you, Robert," said, his voice firm. He stepped closer, reaching out to her. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and your children. But we need to figure out what's going on. We need to find a way to control this." Ilara's expression softened, but her eyes remained haunted. "You don't understand. There's no controlling it, not when it's this powerful." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air between them. Robert could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing control, the fear of what might happen if her children's powers became too great to manage. But even more than that, he could feel the quiet desperation that drove her to this point. She wasn't just afraid for herself. She was afraid for them. A rustle from the far side of the fields caught his attention, and Robert turned just in time to see two small figures darting behind a cluster of trees. Ilara's face turned pale, her eyes widening in alarm. "My children," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They've been watching us. Robert looked toward the trees, his heart racing. What do we do? Before she could respond, there was a sudden, sharp sound, like a crack of thunder, but it wasn't the sky that was shaking. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and Robert's instincts kicked in. The earth seemed to quiver, as if something beneath the surface was awakening. Ilara's expression shifted from fear to something else, something far more determined. "They're not ready," she said, almost to herself. "But they'll have to be." Now, the ground beneath them rumbled. Again, and this time, Robert could see it. In the distance, where the trees met the horizon, a massive crack appeared in the earth. Something was coming out, rising from beneath the soil, like a giant force breaking free from its prison. "Ilara, what is that?" Robert shouted over the noise, but she didn't respond. Instead, she started moving toward the crack, her eyes fixed on it with a mixture of fear and resolve. Robert hesitated for a moment before following her, his heart pounding in his chest. As they reached the edge of the fields, he could see two small figures standing at the heart of the crack, their hands glowing with the same energy that Ilara had used in the fields. Her children, they were no longer the small, helpless beings she had described. They were glowing with energy, their powers now fully unleashed. The crack in the ground continued to widen, and Robert realized with a chill that it wasn't just the earth that was breaking, it was everything around them. "Ilara, stop them!" Robert shouted, fear rising in his throat. But it was too late. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, and the sky above them darkened as the power her children had unleashed reached its peak. Ilara turned to Robert, her face a mixture of regret and determination. "I never wanted this to happen, but it's out of my hands now." Before Robert could respond, a blinding light erupted from the crack, and the world around them seemed to stop. The ground cracked, the sky roared, and everything around them shifted as her children's power took control. The storm had passed, but the air felt heavier than ever. The ground, still cracked and shuddering from the explosion of power, had begun to calm. Robert stood in the midst of the chaos, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The earth around him had fractured, and the sky had gone dark. Yet in the middle of it all, Ilara stood, motionless, her children beside her. The children, once mere shadows in her stories, were now fully revealed, their eyes glowing with the same intensity that had cracked the earth and bent the sky. The two figures were no longer the small, fragile children Robert had seen hiding behind the trees. They were tall, their forms flickering with raw, unrestrained energy. Their skin seemed to shimmer with power, each movement filled with a quiet menace that radiated from their glowing hands. Ilara turned to Robert, her face pale but determined. "This is what I was afraid of," she said quietly. "This is what they are capable of." Robert's breath hitched as he looked at the children. He couldn't deny what was before him. These weren't normal children. They weren't even normal beings. The power radiating from them was something far beyond anything he could comprehend. "They're so powerful," he whispered, fear creeping into his voice. "But they don't know what they're doing. They could destroy everything. They don't know how to control it," Ilara said, her voice heavy with regret. "I've been trying to keep them hidden, keep them safe, but now ... Now it's too late. The power they've inherited did too much for them to handle." Robert stepped forward, instinctively wanting to protect Ilara and her children. "You said you were hiding them for a reason. But you can't hide them forever. They're too powerful. This will only end in destruction." Ilara's eyes darkened. "I know. But I didn't have a choice. I thought if I could protect them long enough, they might grow up to be something different, something better. But I was wrong. They can't live in hiding forever. They were born for something more." Robert stared at her, his mind racing. born for something more. What did that mean? What was she really hiding from him? What was the secret she hadn't shared? The tension between them grew thick and heavy, as the glowing figures of her children continued to stand motionless beside her. The crack in the earth still hissed and glowed, the power from the children's unleashed energy reverberating through. The land, they weren't just born to survive, Elara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. They were born to lead, to reclaim what was lost. My people, ... my kind ones, we ruled the stars. We were the highest order in the galaxy. But when we were hunted down, when the war destroyed everything we knew, I had to escape. I had to protect them, to keep them hidden. Robert blinked, his mind struggling to process her words. Your people. You were rulers. But how? What happened? Why didn't you tell me this before? Elara's gaze faltered for a moment, as though the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Because I didn't want you to know. Because if you knew the truth, you'd see them as threats. You'd fear them the way everyone else does. But the truth is, my children are the last of a race that ruled an empire. Their powers are unmatched, and their potential is greater than anything you can imagine. The ground beneath Robert's feet shifted again, as if the land itself were reacting to her words. He couldn't take his eyes off her children. They stood there, silent, their glowing hands pulsing with energy, unaware of the danger they could bring. They had no idea what their own power could do. The power they possess, it's not something we can control, Elara said, her voice shaking. It's not something they can control. The more they use it, the more dangerous it becomes. If we don't stop them now, if we don't teach them how to control it, they could destroy everything. Robert turned to face her, his mind racing. You said you wanted to protect them. But what happens when they're too powerful to protect anymore? What happens when they're beyond saving? Elara's eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground, her voice steady. That's why I've come to you, Robert. You can help. Me, you're the only one who can help. You have the land, the resources. Together, we can build something safe for them. We can help them grow and learn how to control their abilities. If we can do that, we can prevent the chaos, prevent the destruction. For a long moment, Robert said nothing. His thoughts swirled as he looked at the children. They weren't just alien beings. They were something more. They were the last remnants of a lost civilization, powerful and dangerous, but also vulnerable. They were children, and they needed guidance. They needed someone to teach them how to live in a world that was no longer their own. But the question still lingered in Robert's mind. Could they really control their power? Could he help them without causing the destruction Elara feared? And even more importantly, was he ready to make such a choice? I don't know if I can do this, Robert said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. I don't know if I'm the right person to help them. Elara stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. You are the right person, Robert. You've already given us more than anyone else ever would. You've offered us a chance at a future. Future where they can be free, where they can be safe. Robert looked at Elara, then back at the children. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. Everything he thought he knew about the world had changed in an instant. But there was no going back now. He had a choice to make, and it would shape not only their future, but the future of the world around them. All right, he said, his voice steady. I'll help you. I'll help your children. But we need to be careful. We can't let this get out of hand. Elara nodded, her face a mixture of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Robert. You don't know how much this means. To me, as they stood together, facing the unknown, the sky above them began to clear. The storm had passed, but the true challenge was only just beginning. The night had fallen, and the moonlight bathed the field in a soft, eerie glow. Robert stood at the edge of the land, his eyes fixed on Ilara and her children. The quiet hum of the earth beneath his feet was the only sound that seemed to break the heavy silence that hung in the air. After everything that had happened, the power, the secrets, the looming threat, he found himself standing at a precipice, facing a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. Ilara stood beside him, her face etched with a deep mixture of exhaustion and hope. Her children, once so small and hidden, now stood tall beside her, their powers no longer dormant. The air around them crackled with energy, a constant reminder of the incredible force that simmered beneath their skin. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and Robert could see the weight of responsibility on Ilara's shoulders as she watched them. "They're ready," Ilara said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of fear and hope. "They've learned control, learned to harness their power. But it's not just about them anymore. It's about what comes next. What we do now will determine everything. If we fail, everything could fall apart." Robert turned to her, his heart heavy with doubt. "Are they really ready? I mean, I've seen what they can do. It's incredible, but it's also terrifying. These children, they have the power to change the world. But what if we can't control it? What if we make things worse?" Ilara's gaze softened, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "We can't live in fear of what might happen, Robert. If we don't take control now, if we don't shape their future, someone else will. And you know what will happen then? They won't be children anymore. They'll be weapons. We need to protect them from that. We need to teach them how to use their power, how to build something new." Robert stood in silence, his mind racing, as he looked at the two children standing silently at her side. They were no longer the frightened, hungry beings she had described. They were a force to be reckoned with. Their power wasn't something that could be ignored, nor could it be contained forever. But was he truly ready to take on such a responsibility? As he looked back at Ilara, he saw the trust in her eyes. She wasn't asking him to save them. She was asking him to help shape their destiny, the fate of her people, the future of her. Childrenettes all rested on the choice they made tonight. "I never asked for any of this," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was just a man trying to live my life, keep my land. I didn't ask for aliens or ancient powers or for any of this responsibility, but now I can't turn away." Ilara stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Never expected you to, Robert. But you've shown me something no one else ever did. You've shown me that we can have a future. We can build something, but I can't do it alone. I need your help. We need your help." Her words struck a chord deep. Within him, it wasn't just about Ilara or her children anymore. It was about something bigger. The land they stood on wasn't just a piece of property, was a foundation. A place where they could rebuild, create something new. But only if they acted now. Robert closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He knew this decision would change everything. There was no going back from it. But as he stood there, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders, he realized something. This wasn't just about power or fear or even responsibility. It was about hope. Hope for a future that didn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. A future where beings like Ilara and her children could live without fear. A future where power didn't have to be something to hide or control, it could be something to nurture, to grow, and to use for good. "I'll do it," Robert said finally, his voice steady. "I'll help you. I'll help them. We'll figure it out together." A wave of relief washed over Ilara's face, and for the first time, she allowed herself to smile, genuine, hopeful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means to us." The two children stepped forward, their eyes still glowing, but their expressions had changed. They were no longer afraid or uncertain. They were ready. And Robert could see it in the way they held themselves, their posture, their quiet strength. They were willing to learn, to grow, and to change. And with Robert's help, maybe, just maybe, they could do what had once seemed impossible: build a future. Together, as the wind rustled through the crops, the fields around them seemed to come alive, as if responding to the decision that had been made. The land, the people, the children, they were all part of something greater now. The power that had once threatened to tear everything apart now seemed to promise a future filled with potential. But Robert knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, struggles, and dangers. There would be forces that would try to tear them down, forces that would fear what they represented. But for the first time since Alara had arrived, Robert felt a sense of purpose, a sense that no matter what came next, they were ready to face it together.